All right, great day, everyone. I want to welcome you to another geopolitical roundtable discussion. Very excited today. We launched this last month and had a great time with our conversation, our discussion. So we scheduled again. So again, want to welcome everyone. I know everyone's very excited about it. I am as well. Today we have with us Veles from Rogue News, the Guerilla economist from Rogue News, Matthew Ehret. You can follow his work at his Substack. London Paul of the Series Report, and Ken Schortgen Jr. of Shotgun Economics, and also the Gadfly. Gentlemen, great day. How's everyone doing?
Morning.
Excellent.
Morning, afternoon, evening.
Good morning.
Good morning. Things are doing good.
Awesome. Well, before we kick things off, just want to remind everyone, do us a favor. Go if you look at the description of this video, every comment, the contributions, go to each contributor's site, bookmark, subscribe, show some love and support there as well. Very excited today for today's discussion, and we're going to reverse the order that we went last roundtable discussion. So I thought we'd kick things off with just some opening comments. Flow through some topics, and then for everyone, we didn't post this, but we're actually going to try to do some Q&A later on for today's discussion. So I'll let everyone know, don't post your questions right now. As we get closer, I'll make sure to notify everyone to do that via the chat. So to kick things off today, we have Veles that's going to do his opening comments. So go for it, Veles.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever all of you may be. Glad to be back on the panel with everybody again. My main thoughts or focus is right now again on a number of topics, but most notably this morning the topic I was covering last Friday about South America, specifically the goings on in Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia. That's basically 3 countries in 6 months, 2 of whom with large natural resource assets, and another one who's significant in banking and trade and cargo. So that's a lot of countries in a short period of time. And there's an old joke in South Florida about whether or not people from South America are in town and they're leasing or they're buying assets, whether a place to live or companies or things of that nature. So whenever Argentina runs into a problem, people tend to lease and are there for a while, or in the southeast of the United States. But when people from Venezuela started showing up a number of years ago and were buying up real estate where they could, that was an indicator it was going to be a long haul, and the same is proving true right now, folks from Colombia. So that's my opening.
Awesome, appreciate that. And I believe next we're going to the Guerilla economist. So go for it.
I guess one of the things I'd like to touch upon is what the Chinese media has so aptly named the Last Supper. And you guys know about the photo ops that were done on the G7, the relevancy of these gaggling group of morons. And I'm gonna like to dive deep into that a little bit more, especially hot on the heels where right now the intelligence agencies as well as the military incompetent complex are putting out articles, especially the one on Bloomberg, which I literally had to spit coffee on my computer screen and fell off my drafting chair. I use a drafting chair with a standing desk at times, and I literally fell off. I've injured my elbow in the process, and laughing hysterically because Bloomberg ran an article this morning: "Win or lose, U.S. war against China or Russia won't be short." I mean, the level of lunacy here is quite incredible. So we'll probably do some touching base on that stuff.
Awesome. Matthew.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I won't say too much here at the beginning, but I think definitely just following the folly of the fallen is interesting at the G7, and just hearing some of these guys express their ideas of this fake inside-out world that they think they live in, like Biden coming out saying that Putin is a worthy opponent. But stammering through it, battling his dementia. Every question is like a real final test on an exam where you could just see he could potentially break. It's painful and funny to watch all the time. But these guys are just like now unveiling. We're getting closer to an idea of this green clean initiative, which is this counter to the BRI that they'd been talking about for months and months, which the G7 is going to go hard on now and fund a real global Green New Deal to stop the virulent influence of the polluting bad Chinese. And it's just it's sad and entertaining in some ways together to listen to this. So I mean, I think just seeing the clash of perceptions, one set of perceptions of the multipolar world having a firm grip in what reality is and what human beings actually need going into the future with their political security economic architecture, versus this other thing which has an ivory tower technocratic view of the way they think the universe works that they're willing to die for, it seems, that has no bearing in reality at all. And it's the fruit of a lot of fun discussion, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. Paul, go for it.
Right, I'll be very short and brief because I think I pretty much echo what I said last time as an introduction. We are clearly witnessing the death of an old reality and the birth of a new reality. And as the old reality perishes, it becomes more irrelevant, more absurd, more ludicrous. In fact, any adjective that you want to describe in the negative. And yes, of course, we ought to talk about the G7 and NATO and various other entities and institutions. And then, of course, there's the flip side, which is the new reality. The new reality is just looking at the old reality, going, what are you doing? Why do you continue to persist with this absurdity? And I made this point a long time ago, and it's worth saying that this idea that the old reality is going to retain its relevance, and somehow it's going to spawn this technocratic world in the future is just, I'm sorry, it's absolute nonsense, because it has no relevance in the world. The rest of the world's moving on. It's increasingly becoming more irrelevant. It's a very small, well, not even group of nations. It's basically the US and a few vassal states who there is no substance to it. So we need to start reflecting as much as what the new reality is, but we also need to track what the old reality is doing as it just slowly collapses in of itself.
Yeah. Very well said. Ken, your opening comments, and let's go ahead and jump into after you're finished, jump into your first topic, please.
Yeah, I could probably transition from one right to the other because that's exactly what my opening comments are going to be about. I personally think that we are closer to the end, not just of the dollar as a unipolar reserve currency, but the dollar period. In probably the last 140 years, and I'm going back to the populist movement of the 1870s, where the argument over gold and silver as the primary currency was the biggest hot topic. So much so it affected politics, it affected the Industrial Revolution, it affected a lot of things. Looking at inflation, three banks, Rabobank, Bank of America, and Deutsche Bank, have all brought up that word, hyperinflation. And as we've talked about numerous times, hyperinflation is a confidence event, not a monetary event. So when you start talking about the confidence, you have to look at what China and Russia are. They are deciding to now start working against the dollar openly. When inflation gets to a certain point, and especially with this Green New Deal, the ESG, environmental societal governance, when that starts seeing gas at the pumps be $10 to $20 a gallon, when it starts seeing food up another 40-60%, that's when the population is going to lose confidence in the dollar. And I believe from examples I'm going to go ahead and show, we are probably within months, if not 2 years at the most, if we stay on this course, from seeing the dollar and the seeing unipolar reserve currency gone forever.
Yeah, who wants to follow up with that in regards to the inflation and everything that Kenneth stated?
Veles.
Sure. Well, and it goes to some of the content a number of us have covered on our independent programs as well, which is when I look at the events in South America, as I led off with earlier, to me, a lot of the drive on inflation, as we've seen, is they're choking off the supply. whether by design or just taking advantage of the situation we see in a number of these countries by choking off raw materials. In fact, I saw a story the other day, which is kind of funny, but it goes to how far this whole supply chain problem has gone and contributing to inflation, which is, as here in the United States, we're approaching July 4th holiday in a few weeks, we're running out of fireworks. I mean, it's all fun and games until we start running out of fireworks.
Everything is awesome, and we do stuff. That is a village guy put that out there. That should be the motto of Exceptional Stand. Everything is awesome, and we do stuff.
We do stuff.
Hey, real quick, I want to jump in because, like I said, I wanted to transition to a few examples, and then you guys can go ahead and just.
Oh, my bad, Ken. I thought that was. Go ahead.
Oh,
go
no worries. We had a couple weeks ago, Russia order that its businesses no longer trade in dollars. They're going to accept euros, rubles, probably yuan, etc., but anything but dollars, cutting off that. China has just come out with, now it's not officially on paper, but leaks that are coming out. They are going to bring some massive sanctions against all of the companies that function, either trade with or manufacture within China. New sanctions, as well as perhaps better word, taxation. That's going to be not just tit for tat with the sanctions the West does, but pretty much going to have the capacity of destroying large swaths of the European and U.S. economies, because most of the manufacturing is done in China. And that especially as the prices, you think inflation, consumer price inflation is high now, you start seeing some of those repercussions, consequences of the Chinese sanctions come on to products that are imported into the U.S., and that's going to just shoot prices through the roof. John Williams spoke on a program recently, and he said he believes that inflation right now isn't the 5% that the transitory clowns at the Fed are referring to. It's between 12 and 14% right now.
Yeah,
and he's
Ken, real quick, you're right about that. There's a few firms that I called. They peg it between 13.21 and 14.65, I believe it was.
Yeah, it's only going faster because the supply chain issues are still going on. We don't have full puddings. As a matter of fact, there's now this continuous variant D. You know, this sounds like a bad new vitamin for dieting. But the other thing that stood out to me is home prices, and I decided to use some. I've been monitoring for the past about 6 months. One, a home that my parents used to own in Missoula, Montana, and they sold it for $87,000 back in 1987. Right now, the value of that home is $420,000 in just 34 years.
Mm-hmm.
My dad, who bought a home here in Phoenix in 2009 for about $209,000, that home value is $456,000. It's more than doubled in less than 12 years. Now, of course, I took two different areas, Montana, Phoenix. Well, there was a article that not Brandon Smith, but one of the other alt media guys wrote on recently. I think it was Miss Shedlock. And there was, ever since the lockdowns and the quote unquote pandemic, 7,700, at least 7,700 that he's counted, wealthy have bought land all across Montana, just buying up everything. And I was really pulled into being reminded of that quote, whether it's actually from Thomas Jefferson, or not. But we also know that BlackRock is pretty much buying up, overpaying for every single type of property. There was a new housing unit that was built in Texas, I believe, 2,200 homes, and it was bought up completely by BlackRock. And so if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, which we have now, then by deflation, the banks and corporations, both of them that will grow up around them, will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. How many of those things in that one statement are occurring right now?
All of it.
All of it. Look at California and the homeless. Look at how much property is being taken away from the American people that because they don't have first access to all this cheap credit, and it's all tied to the central bank. Okay, I'm done.
Actually, there's an interesting point there, Ken, with regards to these institutions buying everything up. It's all well and good buying everything up, but if in the end you've got no one to rent it to, and this is starting to happen in commercial real estate. All these institutions bought huge amounts of real estate up, and now they're finding no one wants it, no one wants to rent it, and they're stuck with it. And this is what they're going to end up finding. They think it's all very clever to do what they're doing, but they're going to end up paying, well, frankly, I'm quite pleased they'll pay an enormous price for doing this. The other point worth making with regards to supply chains, what's now self-evident with regards particularly European businesses, a lot of European businesses actually, and you make the point about the threat of sanctions, which basically means that if a company who has operations in China, say European or American, actually implements these sanctions or measures that the US wants to impose on China, if you've got operations in China, but you implement the sanctions, then they're gonna come after you. But despite that fact, what is absolutely the case is more and more European businesses want to move or expand or open operations in China. And one of the principal reasons, apart from why they want to do it, is because the Chinese economy is rotating. It's going to be this enormous consumption-based economy. The other statement they've made is we want to move there because there aren't supply chain issues in China. So most of the world's going, we don't have supply chain. They're saying the supply chains are not a problem in China. Now, part of that is because China's bought up enormous resources in the last year, and they're stockpiling. So they probably in part created a shortage. Now, there can be an argument where someone will say they've done it deliberately, and other people say, well, actually, it was just an opportunity to support markets. So there's two schools of thought, but what they have done undoubtedly is contributed to some supply chain shortages in certain commodity. But it appears that if you go to China, then you don't have these supply chain problems. Now, we know China suffered some degree of price inflation recently, but that's separate from the fact of them building up enormous surpluses in commodities. But that is an important factor, is that they don't think it's so big a problem as we're experiencing globally. And Veles makes the point, to what extent is this an intended, well, not necessarily an intended problem, but a problem that exists? Because the plain simple fact is you can have supply shortages, not necessarily because you can't get hold of the resources, you just simply aren't able to buy those resources because whoever's selling them to you is going, well, hang on, we don't want you to pay us in 90 days or 120 days. We want payment now. And these companies that exist as hand to mouth, again, we can't pay under those terms. We want to pay under the terms of our existing credit agreements or the credit agreement we once had. And they're going, no, that's not possible. That can create supply shortages. So as one example, so there are many reasons why you have supply chain problems. And it can also be because, and this is not widespread by any stretch of the imagination, but if you start to get to the point where certain entities go, well, actually, we don't want to accept dollars anymore for if we're selling you goods, then that could equally become a problem. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute it's a widespread problem at this point, It might be in the future and sooner than we perceive, but that is something else we need to factor into what is causing these problems. But I think most interestingly, it's seen as far less of a problem. So if you go and expand your operations in China, then you get around these problems. So they've got reliable sources of raw materials. So therefore they can produce goods, say in China, and sell them into the market. Right, okay, they're all cost benefits for them to do that. But rather than if I'm based in Europe and I've got a business, then I have these supply chain issues. Therefore, if I move operations there, I'm going to be able to produce my goods reliably and sell them into the market. If I try to do it in Europe, I've got big problems.
Paul raises an interesting point, which I don't know the answer to this, but I put it to all of you in case one of you might know. Based on what Paul just said, it begs the question, what is the current situation concerning lines of credit at the commercial level to corporations from their banks?
It's a huge problem.
When you have, well, yeah, but I mean, it's like, what's the current situation? Is their credit drying up? Is it currently under evaluation?
Yeah, because this is part of the problem with banks. I mean, they took a lot of criticism last year where people were saying, well, look, banks got all this cheap credit or credit at zero interest rate, and they won't loan it to anyone. And there's an argument that says, well, why would you want to loan it? I mean, because they're looking at corporations, even small businesses right across the board going, we're not sure in long term you're going to be able to meet your debt obligations. So they're very reluctant to loan the money. So absolutely, there is this issue of credit drying up. What's also very clear is there's an awful lot of money markets out there going, well, we're going to park some cash at the Fed, but we want treasuries in return on an overnight basis. Well, they want treasuries as collateral because that's one route. If you post something as collateral, you're more likely to get loans so whether it's, but a lot of the loans now, of course, aren't for business expansion. They're just trying to stave off bankruptcy. So yeah, there is undoubtedly a problem with institutions securing credit. And therefore, as we said, if you have a hand-to-mouth existence, you are going to struggle immensely to be able to say if you're used to buying goods and settling in 90 days, suddenly you're told, well, actually, that no longer applies. You're not going to get hold of your goods, or it might be raw materials in terms of production. Therefore, that creates either you simply cannot sell goods or you simply can't manufacture the goods. And therefore, everyone's going, oh, it's a supply chain problem where you can't manufacture the goods. No, it's simply because you're not deemed creditworthy enough to be able to buy the raw materials to produce those goods.
Yeah, very good. Matthew or V, you want to jump into that, or are we ready to move on to the next topic? It's up to you guys.
Well, I could say a word on that.
Yeah, go for it.
Just to I think that's some of this this discussion, which started on the question of inflation and even potentially hyperinflation, the question of credit, the availability of credit to the real economy. I think one thing looking at history that I find very interesting and very useful to assess some of the problems and solutions to the current way of thinking is that the financial oligarchy, because I mean let's just say it straight. There is a financial oligarchy. One of the obsessions that they have currently, or that has created a bit of a problem, is on the one hand there's a drive to nation strip and undermine, get rid of nation states as a governing institution of political and economic affairs in favor of a unilateral hegemon. The whole Great Reset is sort of a cover for this, as I think all of the viewers are aware on varying degrees. But on the one hand, while they have this drive to nation strip, to crush those nation states, especially in the transatlantic, that they've spent quite a good number of decades seeping their tentacles into, and inducing the West, as I've written in a recent article, under the Trilateral Commission especially, and throughout the 1980s and 90s, there's been a program for just massive export of the manufacturing and productive base, which was really unleashed. We saw this in a virulent way under Volcker, who jacked up the credit to stop the interest rate pandemic of the 1970s that went up to about 13% interest by 1980. And so Volcker's approach was to conduct a controlled disintegration of the world economy. Now, he nominally meant that by those terms as control the seizing up of credit to stop the inflation. Now, there was, I think, a higher meaning to that, a double entendre that we discussed last week with V, that was a bit more nefarious. But if you look at all of this, their paradox is that now they have, for the first time, an organized grouping of other nations and strong national powers with Russia, China, increasingly Iran, the entire Belt and Road multipolar alliance system taking on and evolving in leaps and bounds that is preventing them from doing the formula that worked so many times in the past. So if you look at, for example, the three great or big moments over the course of about a decade that I think have value, that are all different sides of the same single process, was the 1923 hyperinflation of Weimar Germany, which was in many ways a controlled hyperinflation. Those who put that Versailles Treaty debt onto Germany after World War I, they knew that Germany couldn't pay. That wasn't news. When they removed Germany's ability to have access to its mining, its rails, its agricultural production that were seized by the victor nations, it knew that it was removing the ability for Germany to produce wealth that would justify the emission of new debts to pay off the debts to the victors. It knew that by unleashing the printing press, it was going to result in hyperinflation and destroy the economy even more. But it did it anyway. Those who are the architects of it pushed forward anyway, because there was a desired effect that they wanted to get. And for a little while, we did see for a few months in Germany, by printing money, there was a certain respite in the markets. There was a certain apparent stability, but that was really an illusion. And the effects of that was totally disastrous. And it resulted really in a new Schortgen economic program of austerity. A new dollar, a new Reichsmark was created, called the Rentenmark, to replace the formerly useless toilet paper money. And there was an apparent stabilization, but not really. I mean, a whole new paradigm was put into place in Germany that resulted in the rise of fascism. We had also that just a few years later, a controlled pinprick, the day all of the broker call loans were called in on the same day in 1929. And that pinprick to the bubbles pop. They knew that a bubble was going to pop. And by having unbounded speculation, especially in real estate in the 1920s in the USA, it created a lot of easy money, but the result was the stupidification of the people and of the elite, the rise and consolidation of a power around the JP Morgan, what came to be known as the preferred clients list. And everybody on that clients list was able to get inside information to sell their stocks before the pinprick. And then after a few days, they were able to just buy up pennies on the dollar, all of the businesses, the houses, everybody who had gone bankrupt, who had been evicted from their homes because they couldn't pay anything because they didn't have work anymore. All of these physical assets were all purchased up by the JP Morgan networks. And then the third thing, a few years later, after a few years of shock therapy and trauma was induced into the psyche of the American people that spread globally, was the 1932-33, London conference that tried to create a solution run by the League of Nations and the Bank of England for a world economy that would then be reorganized by central bankers, who would then say, okay, we just need to get rid of the rights of selfish nation states to govern their own selfish affairs and put it into the hands of more responsible, enlightened technocrats who could control the levers of interest rates and credit flows around the world. And that will be the new utopia. And thank God it was sabotaged in the period from March to June of 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt pulled out all of the U.S. diplomats from any discussions. But still, that was a real intention. And all three of those moments were all one thing. And I think today what we're seeing is just the process has a lot of parallels in its essence. Although today, obviously, we're a world globalized economy. There's more complexity. They didn't have derivatives the way we do today. They didn't have high frequency trading. So they've been able to push this thing a lot further. The bubble's much, much bigger by orders of magnitudes. But in principle, it's the same thing. It's the same formula. The only thing is, back then, they didn't have a combined power of multipolar nations who were creating a viable alternative back in the 1920s or 30s. Roosevelt did certain things that actually did create a condition later on in 1944-45 where a viable U.S., Russia, China alternative could have replaced all systems of empire. That didn't happen. Roosevelt died. But still, we have this interesting parallel of history and the same sort of processes at play that I think offer the mind some useful, space to move.
Yeah.
One thing real quick I'd like to add to this is this. We all know that inflation is a real problem. It's going to get exponentially worse as systems break. There's enough negative feedback loops within the markets, within the capital structure itself, that you're going to have all sorts of disruptions ahead, number one. Number two, one of the things I said years ago, going back to, 2013 or 14, when I had my radio show, one of the things I said is this: as a nation goes broke, its security apparatus goes from within, looking from without, to start looking to enemies from within. And what happens is that the biggest competitor to the average American will become his government, and it will be the government, because we're in a race for resources. Yesterday, I don't know if anybody caught this, but there was a raid. The FBI did a vault raid, and I kind of laughed and chuckled about this, because why anybody would vault anything in the U.S. is laughable. But there was a vault raid where the FBI seized $86 million worth of private property in a California vault.
Hey, V, that was from about a month and a half, 2 months ago.
Okay.
They just said what they said yesterday was that they were not going to give it back.
Exactly.
They're going to keep
exactly.
it.
Which is stunning.
Exactly. Now, there's been several raids like this across the country, not just in the Volta aspect of it, but people who they suspect of doing something, right? Where you're seeing private property and money being taken under the pretext of, national security. Are you working for the cartels? Are you a trafficker? Whatever BS. Or you haven't paid your taxes, blah, 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 blah. All this other stuff that's going around. This is becoming commonplace, number one. Now, put this, what the FBI just did, put that in the backdrop of what is happening with the Internal Retarded Service, also known as the IRS, okay? They are hiring 87,000 people, agents, in the next few years, number one. Number two, the recent propositions that were put out there by the cardboard cutout in chief and his administration is that banks should play a role, in monitoring the flow of credits and deposits going into a business account and report on it. Why? I mean, this goes to if you have an LLC account, you have a corporate account, whatever it is. They want to be able to figure out what's going in there. Plus the hiring of the 87,000, you're looking at a force. Why all of this is happening? Because they understand the game is almost up. They understand that, they need to go after as much wealth as possible and extract. This is all a wealth extraction scheme. Why the hell is BlackRock buying 2,200 housing units in Texas when there's no renters, where people are going broke? In many of the areas, there's a lot of properties in Detroit that are BlackRock owned that have been sitting empty for years. Why are they doing that? It's not the rental income they're interested in. Because some people are like, they're going after they want renters. They want a country of renters. No, they don't even care about that. What's valuable to them is the deed to the property. Why is that? In 2008, we had every mortgage, or 2007, probably even sooner than that. Actually, no, way before that, like in 2001, 2000, around there. Every mortgage in this country, as soon as you buy a house, and if you bought a house and you got a mortgage, guess what? Your deed to that property is destroyed. It's been digitized, and it's been put on the Mortgage Electronic Registration System, MERS. And when it goes onto MERS, guess who's the owner of that note? Well, the same owner who happens to own the actual stock certificates of every publicly traded company in the United States. Also happens to own the actual bond certificates for every single bond in the United States. That is the Depository Trust and Clearing Commission. It's held in that trust account, which is called seeding company. Okay, seeding company. I had a neighbor of mine. He's like, "Hey, man, I was walking my dog, and one of my neighbors is like, 'Hey, V.' I'm like, 'What's up? You heard about this thing called seeding company?' And this guy works in finance. He's he works in on the strategic metal side of things. I'm like, I'm like, you want to go down that route, bro? He goes, yeah, what is that? Because he goes, I stumbled into it because I was trying to research where a couple of my stocks who the hell actually owns the stocks that I'm trading on E-Trade, who actually owns it? And he discovered it was a seeding company. So the question is, why are they holding all this crap? Because even though it's empty properties, they are making and leveraging the deed, which they financialized, and then they create a derivative on it, and they make 10, 20, 30, 40 times the return on whatever the value of that property is. It means nothing to them. They don't care if it's rented by Mouse. They don't care if it's some of the BlackRock properties. I'll show you guys some pictures one of these days. These are dilapidated buildings inhabited by no one, overgrown with grass, but they're trading it because the derivative, remember, we're a fire economy, right? They're trading in the imaginary illusion of something. It's freaking derivatives. They're making a killing on it. They don't care. Why? Because they're trying to prop up and suck as much wealth, imaginary, real or not, out of the system because they know the wheels are starting to come apart. Mortgage applications are tepid. They're the lowest it's ever been. Money velocity is dead. It's the lowest it's ever been. All of these occur because there's so much damn negative feedback loops that are within the capital markets. We're seeing capital destruction on a grand scale, and they don't care because they're going to extract as much wealth as possible, and they're going to sick their attack dogs on you, the FBI, the IRS, the SEC, the CFTC, and they're going to make it impossible. There's your competition, folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to add to that quickly, exactly what happened during the massive wealth transfer between 1929 and 1933, when all of these different houses and buildings and land and farms were bought up pennies on the dollar by the people on the inside who had inside information. Yep. Huge wealth transfer, much like we're seeing today. They didn't, once they owned the farmland, did they reactivate the production of the farms? Nope. No. When they owned the homes, did they invite more people to live in the homes? No. Nope. When they had the steel mills that were the formerly productive steel mills that went bankrupt, did they retool them? No. Nope. 50% of American steel went fallow during the Great Depression. It's not like it wasn't owned by anybody. They could have started producing real wealth to undo the inflation, but they wanted, like you said, back then, they just wanted the paper. They wanted to still gamble on those assets in real estate, even though it was a depression. There were still moments of variability within that process where people were still making money on the markets. But yeah, they didn't care about real value, the real economy. There was no concern whatsoever. So it's just, same thing.
Yeah, but there's a big fundamental difference this time.
Mm.
Didn't have in the past the enormous debasement of the currency and printing it into hyperinflation. They can accumulate. It's not wealth accumulation. It's paper fiat accumulation, which is worthless. Unless they transfer it into an asset that actually has any value, this is pointless. And of course, they won't see the reality of this because historically they don't have this precedent. Yeah, in history, you can buy up assets for cents on the dollar. But we're not in the same territory we were in then. And V does rightly make the point about derivatives. But derivatives are one of the most poorly understood thing, even in the FinTwit community, as to what the reality is with respect to what they are. And they're exposed to that. The leverage to that is so great that they are not, it's not going to be sustainable. And they are going to suffer enormous losses themselves in their arrogance and stupidity, because it comes back to this point. They don't believe that inflation is anything other than transitory. They don't believe hyperinflation is remotely possible. So yeah, on their basis, they're going, well, yes, we can accumulate these assets, but it is important not to refer to it as wealth transfer. This is not wealth being transferred. This is paper being transferred from one individual or one entity to another. That isn't wealth transfer in the current climate. That is the exact opposite to wealth transfer.
You guys remember back the movie The Big Short, when early on, before Ranieri made his mortgage-backed security thing, what's his name? Goslin said, was doing the narration. He goes, 1970s, banking was boring. You might do savings bond to your kid. Banking was boring. There weren't the derivatives they have today. There wasn't the financialization that is today. There wasn't the central bank. I mean, the central bank using fiat currency was new because, it hadn't really gone into that stretch since 1971. So all of this stuff was just being engineered, following, really the engineering started in the early 90s when Greenspan lowered interest rates from 7.5 down to 4.5 during the Clinton years, helping to build the dot-com bubble. And then, of course, once they started that road, they couldn't not stop. And that's when we saw, after 2001, 2003, interest rates going down to 0.5%, and likewise. So, banking was, for the most part, boring, and there wasn't this type of games that were being played. Now everything is derivatives, and Paul and I have talked about this. What you're seeing in almost every aspect is they are so much. And there is liquidity issues, yes, but there's so much credit out there that is seeking assets, and there's just no assets. This is why they create things like derivatives. They create things like futures contracts for cryptocurrency. How in the hell the price can be determined on these exchanges for cryptocurrencies by the algorithms that are running the futures contracts, the options play over here at Goldman Sachs or wherever? That is just mind-blowing how it can affect these things, because cryptocurrency price should be strictly by buying and trading the cryptocurrencies, but it's not. So I got into a Twitter pitching contest with somebody. Do you think that the majority of retail investors who are hard at work during the day are sitting there watching when Elon Musk makes a statement about Bitcoin and Dogecoin, and instantaneously the price goes up or the price goes down? These aren't retail investors who are sitting there watching their Twitter account 24/7. These are algos that are now tied into the cryptocurrency. And if people, if the Bitcoin evangelists can't get that in their brain, then I don't know what I can say to them. It's been co-opted by Wall Street, and that's the new price determinant. And you just better go on the ride.
Ken, I'll provide some detail onto the whole crypto thing real quick from the institutional side. 3 years ago, one of the things I said is, like, look, people just jump in at 6,000 because a lot of institutions are at play. You got to have a pragmatic view of it. I laugh at these crypto tards who are out there. Bitcoin is the popular revolt against the system. Bitcoin is the system. 97% of all the Bitcoin supply is held by less than 3% of the wallets. Okay, that's a fact. All right, you have one of the biggest conglomerates within the crypto space, a company called DCG Group. Nobody really knows about them. Nobody knows who DCG Group is, but they own your Coinbase, they own Kraken, they own several hundreds of different exchanges and platforms. And I mean, they bought out BitGo, which was one of the most preeminent escrow and custodial service companies for crypto. I mean, they own everything. Now, who the hell is DCG Group? Well, it's a conglomerate with vast ties into Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Wells. I mean, you name it, right? So the sharks are already swimming in the pool, okay? And in terms of the stupid Bitcoin price, let me explain something to you guys, right? People are like, oh my God, look at this. Bitcoin, $60,000. Oh my God, it's $30,000. It's $40,000. Let me explain something to you folks, okay? I've explained this once before. What is happening with these exchanges, like what Ken said, it is algorithmically run 24/7 because nobody's sitting there at a trading desk trading this nonsense at the volumes you see it's being traded. So what you have these exchanges, especially the big ones, right? Your Coinbases, your Krakens, your Huobi's and whatnot, right? Your Geminis, they're wash trading. They're basically, they'll have 15 different wallets set up that they control on one side. And they'll have 20 some odd wallets set up on the other side that they control. And they're moving the coin algorithmically from one wallet to another wallet, creating this imaginary trading volume. Folks, let me explain something to you. I'm in the process of, we were in the process of bringing out an exchange until we realized how much of a pain in the ass the process is, right? And we weren't doing it honestly. But one of the things, the options that we were asked by some of the developers, like, hey man, you want us to link in your trading volume? I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Well, we just tap into this API that magically gives us a perceived trading volume for the exchange. I'm like, so you're meaning if somebody were to take a look at our exchange, it would see that we're actually trading tens of thousands of Bitcoins per hour per day, but in reality, there's nothing going on. He's like, yes. Okay, these are the dirty tricks that are happening. All right, and let me explain something to you. I've talked to a lot of people. Like, oh, look, I'm a crypto millionaire. I'm a crypto millionaire. I'm like, okay, but why are you living in your mom's basement? Because they can't get the fiat to actually buy something. All right. If you're a crypto millionaire, but you can't go to Starbucks and buy a cup of coffee with your Bitcoin, what use is it? Right? It's of no use. It's there for fiat speculation. It's a wonderful vehicle in order for me to move capital from like Australia to Hong Kong in a few seconds with very little fees, skirting any sort of banking institution. It's great for doing that. But apart from that world, it's really nothing. Why? Why can't you liquidate your crypto? Well, guess who controls all the liquidation layers? Guess who controls all the on-ramps and the off-ramps? It's the institutions. And guess who's there? When you try to liquidate through a cryptocurrency in the United States and you're a U.S. citizen, well, the IRS is there. And so is their 39.6% tax rate, which is also going to go up higher. And plus the capital gains tax that you're going to be hit with. This is the issue that's facing the country. Are there real cryptographic currencies there, real coins that are actually have real amazing use case scenarios? Yes, but they're hated by the regulators, and they're not. And the exchanges that are in the United States are not allowed to carry them. Case in point, like Monero. Okay, so this whole thing with this crypto thing that's going on, folks. When the dust settles, when exceptional stand is done away with and relegated to the dust heap of history, because we everything is awesome and we do stuff, right? When that's relegated to the dust heap of history, and when the Western civilization completely comes to the abject end that it deserves, okay? This whole crypto nonsense, 99% of it won't even be around. There'll be a handful of coins that'll be successful. And there are some coins that actually have technological merits, and you see some, for platform streaming, for invoicing, for things, for actual real use case scenarios. But they're not in any sort of a volume that is going to be some sort of get-rich-quick thing. So enjoy the hype. This is the modern-day tulip revolution. Sad to say it, guys. And as somebody who works on the inside, and one of the clients that I work with is the largest liquidity provider for cryptographic currencies in the world. They deal with over 40. They're operating in over 42 to 43 different countries and 175 institutions globally. Okay, and they themselves have a pragmatic view of this. So that's my take.
Very well said. Yeah, very well said. If it's okay, can we consider that your topic for today's discussion?
Yeah, that's right.
Actually,
and then Paul,
CJ,
I know
I wanted to mention something to do with the derivatives market.
Yes,
to highlight an issue. What a lot of people won't be aware of is the extent to which Western, for want of a better description, financial operators have been supporting bond markets. So much so, they created fabricated US bond market demands using interest rate swaps, i.e. derivatives.
Bingo.
They created bond rallies based on tens, hundreds of trillions of dollars of interest rate swap. And this is why they don't want the yields to break out on the 10-year or 2-year or anywhere. Because if those yields break out, it will blow up the bond markets. If it blows up the bond markets, it will blow up the interest rate swap markets, and it will take down the West in 2 seconds flat. So all this idea that the West's in control of everything and it's all part of a game and they're just moving pieces around, they're not. They have been trying to fight off their destiny way before 2008, way before 2000. We're going back into the 90s. And they failed, and every time when they had an opportunity to reflect and make the appropriate changes, they didn't. They failed to do the right thing in 2008. This isn't a game. They are now drinking the last chance saloon. And if you want to put this in context, when you look at the amount of financial products and loans tied to like LIBOR, so that includes interest rate swap, mortgages, leverage loan, the market is $500 trillion.
Yep.
So if you start to have forget. I mean, people focus on the debt level, which, of course, if you have rising interest rates, yeah, that is an enormous problem. It starts to raise funding costs, which is going to cause mayhem in the markets. Why? Because you get huge uncertainty in US monetary policy. Suddenly you get elevated credit risk. CDSs, there's another derivative for you. So it starts to cause enormous implosion with regards to credit markets. But this is why just a simple matter of, if they're now stuck in a position, the Fed going, well, we've got a choice. We either suppress the bond, the yields, because we have to, otherwise the derivatives complex blows up and it's game over. Or we don't do that. So what's the consequences? You just end it with a massive increasing inflation for all the reasons we've discussed today. So please, when people keep reading all these grandiose stories about the Great Reset and how the world, these technocrats are going to change the world, they're all going to have us running around in AI hamster wheel. I'm sorry, it's nonsense. They are not in control of anything. Everything has been spiraling out of control. I mean, in reality, the United States as an empire was collapsing 100 years ago, virtually. Everything since then is not being an empire in ascent, it's an empire in decline. And that's why we've had the failed dot-com boom. That was kind of like your green revolution for the 2000s, failed, completely failed. Then they had the housing market and all the subprime crisis of 2008, that failed. Then they sat there and went, well, there's nothing we can do. We need to preserve our empire. So therefore, we'll just have loads of cheap credit. We'll keep these inflationary bubbles inside Wall Street. And this is why the other myth, this planned epidemic in 2000, when that pandemic happened, whatever we believe it to be, it was the end of any chance they felt they had of surviving, because the bubbles that were in Wall Street and the banks were then in Main Street. This is why we have Main Street inflation. This is why everything's spiraling out of control. And the derivatives markets, and we just highlighted interest rate swaps is one example, is why this could never have been a planned epidemic, because they would not have allowed inflation to creep into the Main Street. Never mind what it does to economies, businesses, corporations, individuals. What it is going to do to the derivatives markets is completely upended. And we talk about the United States is 20 trillion in debt, or whatever it is, 22, 23, it doesn't really matter in reality.
28.
Or whatever. And we talk about, corporations.
More than that if you count unfunded liabilities.
Yeah. I mean, there's 250 probably trillion unfunded liabilities. The derivatives market, it dwarfs this.
Yeah.
And this is something they've been trying to manage since 2008. There are banks, and I'm not going to name individual banks because I'm not entirely sure it applies to these banks, but there were banks who had in the past, in 2010, 11, Western banks, who were so underwater with derivatives contracts, they had to be secretly bailed out with swaps to the tune of $20 trillion. So this is the reality. All this idea of all this control going on, and the World Economic Forum has existed for decades. Name me one thing it's ever done in its history. Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
It's an annual circle jerk of some of the most debased minds. That's all it is.
And as someone who knows people who were invited to go there, they said it's a bunch of nobodies talking about nothing.
Yep.
Who don't actually have any influence. And even the people there find it rather amusing how the alt media think they're big movers and shakers in the world. They're not big movers and shakers in the world. That's another one of those alt media myths that keeps being populated. We need to start dealing with the reality of this and facing there isn't any solution to this. There is no, whether people think it's a magical solution because Trump was president, or somehow the World Economic Forum and their Great Reset is going to achieve its goal. They're sat there going, it's game over. We need to do something. The Green Revolution isn't some attempt to try and control the world. It's them going, maybe this is a way we can save our empire. Maybe this is a way we can generate this enormous economic boom again. Although I did in my own podcast and spent basically 45 minutes breaking down exactly why the whole green revolution is a complete farce. And here's one really small example why that's the case. You can create all the wind farms you want in the world. But here's the problem. You have to extract the raw materials to put in the wind farms. And they say we want to phase out oil and gas. Well, here's the problem. Where do you get plastics from? Oil. What are you going to do with all these spent wind farm turbines after 15, 20 years? You're going to bury them in the ground because they're not biodegradable.
Paul, even worse than that, where do women get all their makeup from?
Well, yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. That is.
What about toothpaste, toothbrush? I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah.
Car tires, everything is. There's thousands of items that are petroleum based. Thousands.
Yeah. So that's just one small example why this is nonsense. It is never going to succeed, and it is rather like the .com era, where they all came out. There was all this money pumped into it. All these grandiose ideas.
Paul. Electric cars are going to save us, and windmills and solar farms.
Yeah, and what they don't realize, if they pursue electric cars to the degree they claim, what they'll end up doing is stripping the world of all these assets, of all these commodities, like whether it's lithium, whether it's rare earth metals, all the rest of it. They'll kill the supply so there's none left, and in the end, they'll then go, oh, hang on, we can't produce any more of these goods in the future because we don't have any raw materials left to do this.
Right, it's not renewable.
Nonsense.
It's not renewable.
Yeah, there's no such thing as renewable energy. It's a myth because it's not renewable. You're having to take resources out the ground and produce goods, or produce a wind turbine, produce solar farms, electric cars, whatever. It's an
just to say.
farce.
You can't even produce a wind turbine using windmill energy. It's the very opposite.
Well, yeah.
Very good point, Matt.
Yeah. So anyway, this is the point where you need to start to deal with. This isn't.
Has anyone told Greta Thunberg this?
Well, actually, I'm getting someone to transcribe the podcast I did, and I'm going to send it to people like her to have a read. Because the truth is, when you assess what is needed to produce these, you want to produce electric cars. I mean, if you go back we shouldn't go back too much in history, but you go back even 30 years ago and what materials they used to produce cars. Now the amount of rare earth metals that have to go in every single electric car. Before long, there's going to be no rare earth metals. So if we end up depleting the world of rare earth metals, what are we going to do then? We're in enormous trouble. So it's so farcical, it's so nonsensical. Forget the reality of whatever people believe climate change is or isn't. That is not even the point. If you allow these morons to do this, they will end up destroying all the entire resource base. They'll cause far more environmental damage than fossil fuels could ever create. And why is this being sold? Because a lot of it in the West is all these politicians are too frightened to go, actually, well, that's not a good idea, because they know their very political career depends on it. So it's just become something where everyone virtue signals about how wonderful it is to do all these things. And that's why in reality, when someone starts to sit down and go, hang on, for every windmill, we're going to have to, how much ore body are we going to have to drill out the ground to extract whatever we need to put in it? And then we're going to have to repeat the same process 15, 20 years later when it all gets scrapped, because these all have finite lifespan. What are we going to do with all the batteries from electric cars? And how are we going to produce the electricity to support, I don't know, 1 billion electric cars globally? It's farcical. It's not reality. And we need to stop worrying about the perception of these clowns who people think are still in control. We should be far more worried about the fact they're not in control. They don't have any control over anything. And at some point, we're going to have major problems. Who in our Western societies is going to stand there and go, well, actually, we've got a solution to this? Rather like when Russia collapsed, Yeltsin didn't do anything, but the one thing he did was what was meant to Putin. So they had someone who could actually drag Russia out of the mire that it was in. We don't have a Putin in the West.
No, we don't.
We have all these career
Don't worry,
politicians.
we have Trump who's coming back in August, Paul. I don't know if you got the memo. Trump is coming back in August. And the white hats are in charge, Paul. The white hats and the crash helmets. They renamed themselves the crash helmets. They're in charge as well.
But anyway, enough said. But the point is that these are the reality. So let's start worrying about how the West is going to handle the fallout, rather than worrying about these mythical ideas that there's all these shadowy figures who are somehow controlling us, because they're not controlling anything. If they were controlling anything, they wouldn't be doing the things they're doing. They wouldn't be sat there trying to retain relevance and interest. They wouldn't be trying to destroy China and Russia and Iran and the multipolar world if it was no threat. The reason they're trying to destroy it and failing is because when that is fully ascendant and the West is gone, their empire, what's left of it, and there's not much, will be gone forever.
Very well said, Paul. Gentlemen, anyone want to continue that conversation, or should we pivot to another topic of one of your preferences?
Matt's look like he's ready to comment, Matt.
Okay, go for it, Matthew.
I just know time is limited, so I don't want to necessarily deprive everybody of having their thoughts expressed. But yeah, I mean, I would say one thing that I feel like when I listen to you, Paul, and I really appreciate your knowledge and insight into a lot of these processes that are very mysterious for a lot of people in terms of derivatives, how the game of perceptions is managed, and all of these things, and via also it's always a pleasure to listen to both of you guys. But I would say though that the question of intentionality, historical forces and intentionality driving as causality a process, if it does exist, if it is a discoverable factor shaping processes, then I think it's good to look at that, even though some people might say, oh, that's conspiracy theorizing, thus not worthy of respect. But if there are active intentions trying to move things in a direction, despite the fact that they might be completely foolish and insane, which I think they are, then why not acknowledge it too? If it's provable, if it's demonstrable. And I mean, I am of the view, as you know, that I believe that there are conspiracy theories, for good and for bad, in history and in the present. And I think that they're less than what many people think they are, because a lot of people who think of this think of shadowy forces of an Illuminati controlling the world, and they have like godlike powers, and it's all just a game. This idea that there's like a left versus right in the world, or all sides, China, Russia, the US, are all controlled by these shadowy Rothschilds, and it's all a game to screw with the plebes. Now, I don't believe in that at all. I think that ultimately there are forces that do have more influence in some ways, and they do have an agenda to reduce the world population. Is something I think is quite demonstrable if people look into it, and to get rid of nation states. I think these are things that are demonstrable, but I also think that they're incapable of achieving what they want either. If you look at Mark Carney, I just read his new book, which is sort of a sales pitch for him being installed as a prime minister of Canada to replace this gimp Trudeau, who they wouldn't really trust being in public with a real leader like Putin or something. They just can't, he's only useful as like a thing to get, middle-aged women to wet their pants in excitement. There's really nothing behind him. And so they would like a little bit more of a responsible technocrat to be able to manage discussions with world leaders. And a Carney would fit the bill. They got Carney's other Goldman Sachs buddy in power in Italy, who also was the head of the Financial Stability Board right before Carney was.
Super Mario.
Yeah. I mean, and he's made the point as well, get ready for the new paradigm of a green set of values. Both of them have been working very hard at transforming the world economy from being one that valued, the absurdity of the free markets and derivative contracts shaping in a speculative sort of modality the prices of all goods, which they rightfully criticize. If you read their writings going back over a decade, they rightfully criticize this way of trying to define value. But at the same time, they've both been like leading green priests trying to say we need a new set of values around green climate compacts, to seize up credit, where we will have global international enforcements to stop nations from being climate offenders. And even though they could make a lot more money by allowing banks to issue loans to productive enterprises like SNC-Lavalin or mining cartels or cartels, but there's all sorts of construction firms that will no longer, if they're pollution offenders on Carney's brown to deep green gradient, his 50 shades of green, if they fall too far into the brown side of their gradient, then they're going to be not liable to access loans. They will have insurance, new forms of insurance that are going to be far too high for them to even ever pay back those loans. So they will be just, as Carney says, you either conform to the new paradigm, or we're going to take you out of existence. And he says it directly, but he doesn't represent himself. He's not like a lone gunman or something with Draghi. Like, these guys are part of a machine that has a certain commitment that wants to rewire value to being passive, where instead of producing actively things to create value that's measurable in some way by producing things in reality, they want to constrict, they want to incentivize monetarily the absence of action. So the idea of, creating conservation land, like Biden says by 2035 or 2030, they want to have 30% of the US land totally banned from any development, 100% conservation, and that will have value. People can then, speculate in their fantasy ivory tower world on the values of these passive grounds, or putting carbon swaps onto Africa or other poor nations to say, okay, look, you could sell your excess carbon credits, because everyone's gonna have a quota, and if you don't produce carbon dioxide to reach the ceiling of that quota, that excess of unused quota, you could then monetize and sell it to developed countries that want to buy it so that they could pollute a little bit more, and you could get more money by not developing, because if you start developing at that point an industrial base in Nigeria, the way China is really going out helping these African countries develop full spectrum economies, well, then you're going to miss out on a lot of money that you could make otherwise to sort of. So, I mean, this is, one might say this is all just chaotic desperation to keep the system afloat, but I don't think so. I think that their intention has always been to create a bubble, insane system, and bubbles pop. The tulip bubble was always something you could know was going to pop, just like the John Law bubble of the South Sea bubble of the 1720. They knew that bubbles by their nature pop, and you're able to get an effect. 1929 was one example, but there's others. And I think what they've been doing since 1971 has been a long-term game plan to create a bubble economy so that people don't pay attention to reality in order to get an effect.
But the problem is you can't create a bubble economy that's sustainable. And
they don't want it. They don't want to create a bubble economy.
Okay, so what? Right. Okay, so if they blow everything up, right. What happens then? What happens? Right.
Technocratic feudalism, depopulation. A world. Yeah.
So you're going to do that to an American nation of 300 million people with 500 million guns.
Yeah.
And you think
that's what they want to do. I'm not saying that their policy is genius, but that's what they want.
No, it's not even a question of genius.
No,
right?
Because the problem is they want a civil war in America. They've always wanted to. It's not an American empire. It's not a British empire. It's something else. It's a financier empire which is above nations, which has wanted to destroy nations from within for a long time.
There's a point in history, but there's a point in history where that does no longer apply. And it doesn't.
When did that happen? When did that stop happening? When did that not?
When did it stop? One of the major turning points was when the people I personally know went to the Chinese and the Russian in the 90s and said, "You need to birth a multipolar world," and they went, "Okay, yeah, we agree with this." And that was one of the big fundamental turning points when the world was no longer the way it is. But the idea that they destroy everything.
Who are these people who told China and Russia to build a multipolar world? I'm just curious.
I'm not telling you who they are.
No, I mean, give me an idea, and describe it in a loose term without naming names.
Well, how do you mean in a loose term?
The best way to describe Western insiders, Western financiers? It
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who they are.
I mean, it's a weird thing to say that they told.
Well, why is it weird when they told me everything 15 years ago that would happen? Hang on. They told me everything that was going to happen in 2010, and 300 or 500 of those exact things have come to pass. So they're either incredibly good at guessing, or they're incredibly visionary in understanding what was happening in the world and what changes were happening. So the issue is, you can say they'll create neo-feudalism, But what are they going to do with the population, the people? I mean, everyone always goes, yeah, what they'll do is they'll destroy everything and they'll put everyone on permanently on universal basic income. Well, you can do that for a short period of time. Then you create Weimar Germany. So when the average American's paying $20 for a loaf of bread and they have no money, they're not going to sit there and go, well, I'm quite happy with this. This is not a reality. This was never a reality. Rather like the one world government, it was never a reality. It was never going to happen. And it's just now become an established fact that all these things were going to happen. But why
are you saying that the multipolar world was a creation of a formula that was put to China and Russia by foreign Western interests of some way? That's why they're doing it?
Yes. That's exactly why they were doing it.
It sounds like you're a conspiracy theorist here. Hang on.
How am I a conspiracy theorist when everything I was told has played out in reality? This is not a guess. This has happened. They said everything that would happen in very broad terms, but that has subsequently happened. How's that a conspiracy when it's actually happening? Anyone who's listening who subscribes to my podcast will tell you I've detailed everything for the last 5+ years, nearly 6 years, all the events that they were going to happen in the future. Now, what? So am I good at guessing? Am I just extremely good at guessing what's going to happen in the future? That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a fact. There are conspiracies. No one's disputing this. There are dozens of real conspiracies that go on in this world and have gone on for longer than we care to remember. But there's an awful lot of conspiracy theories that don't stand up to scrutiny in reality. So the idea they create a technocratic or neo-feudalism is completely contrary, because all these big corporations depend on all of us functioning in their world. So they make enormous amounts of profits because we buy all their goods and services. So what we're saying is all these big corporations with all these rich entities are all going to go, we're going to sacrifice all that for some greater good, and we're going to destroy our own empire. We're going to destroy our banks, all our corporations, and then we're basically going to have a bunch of people living as neo-feudalists with 500 million guns. And someone actually sat there and went, that's a good idea. No chance. No, they're not. They're not going to sacrifice their empires willingly just for some greater cause, because that again implies there is this group of people controlling everything. There isn't. There's entities and spheres of influence, banking, finance is an obvious one, corporations, who will cooperate, work together, but they're not going to stand there and go, we'll just destroy our empire for some greater good.
Paul, here's the thing. The thing is this. Let me put it this way. I like cars. All right, I like to go fast. And right now I'm working on an 8-second car. So what I do is I get along with other gearheads. And us gearheads get together and we conspire on how to shave off a 1/10 of a second here and a 1/10 of a second there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm doing that at such a low level, okay, there's always going to be people at very prominent positions of power in roundtables and think tanks and groups, and they have all these meetings, and I make fun of them as a bunch of circle jerkers. But the fact remains that there are billionaires conspire with other billionaires to carve up the world, okay? A world to them that has no borders, that has no culture, where they themselves are the plutocrats that are established, the oligarchs that are established at the very tippy top of this whole entire thing, ruling and whatnot. Now, in terms of America, there's hundreds of millions of guns here, granted, right? What would they do to America? Well, America is a very, very rich, resource-rich land and organization, right? I mean, it's got tons of natural resources, right? What they would do to America would be the same thing they did in Syria. It'd be the same thing they did in Iraq. It's the same thing they did all over the Middle East, because the point is the chaos. Chaos makes it easy to grab resources. They look at the U.S., 300 million useless eaters, okay? And I sat around, Paul, and I sat with a couple of guys from Goldman, a few guys from JPM, and I sat in a roundtable group, and I said and there was a question, not posed by me, right, but posed by a few individuals, and the question was, what would an economic collapse in the United States, what would that actually look like? Well, here's what it looks like. It looks like 20. It looks about close to 27 million dead in about 90 days. Because when you have a complete breakdown where ships can't move, planes can't move, trucks can't move, you have a supply chain shock. Majority of Americans, who are already the most over-medicated population on God's green earth, will die from starvation, malnutrition, dehydration, lack of medication, and violence. That creates the perfect environment for them to go ahead and do their land grab. There's a reason why they're pushing for more and more of federal land to not be developed. There's a reason why. There's natural resources there, right? Now, these guys are planning on doing this, right? They're planning on, in the sense of, when you look at this pattern that, hey, you know what, I can't develop here, I can't develop there. They're locking up the resources. They're overheating the economy. One of the guys that I spoke to, that was a good buddy of mine, he ran the nuclear end of this entire country. He was working with an NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And he was telling me that, dude, it's like it's everybody coming up right now in the NRC, in the Nuclear Regulatory Committee, everybody has what's called a run-to-fail mentality. And it's problematic not only through the bureaucratic classes that are in the United States and politicians, but it's also evident within the corporate structure. The corporate maniacs that are in this country, your Amazon, your Bezos, the morons from Apple and Microsoft, these people think they're going to be sitting at the top of the table managing this global plantation, not a global plantation, excuse me, but this plantation in the United States, which will be a failed state. It will be like a Mexico. It will be probably even worse, right? Like in Iraq. They like sectarian violence. They like balkanization. They like the chaos because it makes it easier for them to get the resources. Now, why are they out for the resources? Because the paper markets are overheating. It's becoming worthless. They can no longer push their wares on the rest of the population of the entire world. And they realize they can offshore. Look, there's people that are in control of Google and Apple and all these corporations and Ford and whatnot. They can make more money selling it to the rest of the world.
But here's the point. But here's the problem with that. If the US becomes a nation like that, the rest of the world will just isolate them and won't buy any of their goods. Because do you know what they'll be far more worried about? Here's a nation with an enormous nuclear arsenal, but we're still going to buy your goods and trade with you while you've got this totally dysfunctional nation with an enormous nuclear arsenal. The United States, if it ends up that way, will become the North Korea of the 21st century, until there's a point when the rest of the world goes, how are we going to deal with these as a nation?
Yeah, that's going to be a problem.
But therefore it's not a reality that they were ever going to consider this as an option, because ultimately it will not succeed. You could create feudalism in the past, for sure. You cannot create feudalism in Western nations in the modern era.
Of course you can.
Not sustainable.
Yes, you can,
but it's not sustainable. It won't last 5 minutes.
You're giving them too much credit, Paul. Like your idea of what empires do, you're giving them too much credit. Like you're saying because it won't work, they wouldn't do it, and it's like you're assuming that they're too smart if they're anything, or if they're
I'm not assuming they're anything. I'm not that. I'm not.
Well, I'm saying your idea of what a conspiracy is naive. It's like it's not the case that conspiracies.
Sorry, I'm what?
It's naive. I'm not saying dumb. I'm saying naive.
What is naive?
Your assumption of what conspiracies are is a naive theory of conspiracies.
So you understand everything I've ever said about conspiracy theories in my life, and you tell me what conspiracies I've ever discussed or not discussed to make that assessment.
Your idea of a conspiracy that you think you're refuting is that it must all work. It must all be absolutely under control, or else if there's chaos, then it couldn't be a conspiracy. And it must be out of control and not a conspiracy.
No, I never said that conspiracies don't exist that have failed. I can give you a whole list of them: Ukraine, Belarus, Cuba, Syria, Nicaragua, Yemen. We can go on and on and on. Azerbaijan and Armenia, and that's just in the last few years. We had the Arab Spring. This isn't a question of them legitimately, from their perspective, trying to invoke conspiracy or some sort of attempt to do whatever they want to do, whether it's internationally or domestically. My point is, they would never. They have done everything right to preserve their financial system for over 20 years. And now we're suddenly led to believe they're going to abandon all that, throw it all into the dust bowl of history, and now they're going to grab some other idea of how they're going to implement some more insane policy in the future.
Paul, they don't care about this land. They don't care about the people.
No, it's not even a question of caring about
it's a larger market overseas.
Yes, but they're not going to have any access to that market because the rest of the world, the rest of the world is pragmatic.
The rest of the world is like, hey, United States of America, you're a basket case. You're a failed state, but you have resources. We'll trade with you on the resources. We don't care about your internal quibbles and quabbles.
They won't do. No, they won't do.
It's going to be like Colombia in the 70s and 80s, Paul. That's what the United States is going to turn into.
They won't do it because if you've got a dysfunctional nation with nuclear weapons, you're not going to start trading with. You're going to make it so you squeeze that nation.
It's not the American public that controls the nukes, Paul. It's going to be the military, which are strictly going to be in control of the oligarchy.
So hang on, we've got the military in charge of a bunch of lunatics who've destroyed America.
No, I said the military they're in control of the oligarchy. So the military is there to get a paycheck. Now they're going to have some nukes. So what's going to happen? I think a lot of these nukes are going to be disbanded. Most of them are obsolete, don't even work. They're going to find some way to either sell them off, deconstruct them, reprocess them, or something. And again, I'm talking worst case scenarios here. I'm talking about America going to what does a failed state look like? What does an economic collapse look like? 27 million dead in 90 days.
There's no disputing what the effects will be of a complete collapse, whether it's the United States, whether it's the United Kingdom or the European Union. Of course, it's going to be catastrophic. But the idea that they're intentionally collapsing everything they've spent the last 20 years trying to preserve, why they're doing everything they can to try and destroy.
Everything you're talking about preservation, Paul. They already have it. They've preserved everything they needed to preserve.
They have what then?
They have the land, Paul. They have the land rights. They have the mineral rights. They have the resource rights. They control the rails of commerce. They have all that. They don't need 300 million Americans.
Yeah, but the point is the world will not do anything with them.
Who says and also you think the Chinese? If China can
the Chinese will not. The Chinese will not deal.
If China can do business with Djibouti, if China could do business in Yemen, if China could do business with factions in Libya, they don't care about a couple of American factions. It's just another way of business.
Oh no, they absolutely. What a thing that's threatened to assassinate their president, has threatened to try and destroy China's economy, has tried to basically topple the entire nation with things like Xinjiang, and they're going to turn around and go, well, we'll forget all that. We'll trade with you because suddenly you've got an abundance of resources that you can't finance. They'd end up having to just print money to extract all this stuff because no one's going to buy their debt.
Well, nobody's going to buy their debt. The debt has to be canceled or restructured.
Therefore, you're going to whatever population you have left, whether it's 300 million or whatever people perceive it to be. What you're going to end up then is a population starving to death because they can't afford to feed themselves. So, and you think that that's going to be a sustainable model, and the rest of the world's going to go.
That's not the model. That's not the end result. That's going to be part of the process. The United States is going to fall apart. There's going to be starvation. There's going to be some breakdown of society, and that's going to be for a couple of years until something emerges. And I think what's going to emerge on the other side is going to be something that's going to be restructured and rebuilt, utilizing the help of the international community. But these oligarchs that are here, they want to be in the positions of power to best extract for themselves and for their own profits what that reconstruction looks like on the other end of it.
Yeah, but here's the problem. All these oligarchs, for want of a better word, but it's a useful description, are all at each other's throats at the moment.
Oh, they are, because why are they at each other's throats? Because they've already shored up what they needed to get. They've already preserved
they're at each other's throats because there's some who want to destroy the banking sector. There's some who want to destroy corporations, and they're all sat there going, "Hang on, you're not going to basically strip me of my perceived whether it is."
They're fighting for a place at the table.
It's not even. They're fighting for their own survival, and they're eating each other alive. And that's why the political system is become so obviously just totally dysfunctional in the US because they're eating themselves
billionaires
alive.
don't kill billionaires, man. They don't do that. That's too systemically shocking for the system, right? So what they're doing right now, this is like this is almost to them. It's like WWF. They're jockeying for position. They're fighting for room at the table, but they don't want to kill the other guy. Like Bezos don't want to kill Gates. Gates doesn't want to kill Bezos, right?
Yeah, but here's the point. It's like everyone goes, well, it's like one of the statements that were made about Amazon. Look, we've had the pandemic. All the small businesses are going to survive and are being destroyed, and Amazon's surviving. Until I have to point out to people that Amazon's business model depends on small businesses surviving for them because they're basically a reseller who takes a cut on top and makes profit. So that immediately destroys the argument. If you destroy all the small businesses, Amazon is gone. It will no longer exist.
Amazon makes no money on the retail side, Paul. They do jack shit on the retail side. Their money is in web services. They've made no money on retail. They've lost money on retail.
Okay, yes, but
they're going for market share. Why?
Right. If you destroy the entire Western and create neo-feudalism, they'll make no money on web services.
Neo-feudalism is
right. Here's the point.
Term. It's not the correct term that I would use, but it's
if we don't buy any of their services, they'll all go bust.
No, they'll just sell it elsewhere.
The whole Western model depends on us believing that this. We don't like governments, and we get rather pissed off with what they do, but we think we're doing okay out of it on some level. Well, most people do, and others don't. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually destroy that myth, even though it is a myth, and we're going to take everything off everybody, and then everyone's just going to sit there and go, oh, well, that's okay. I don't mind you destroying everything. It's not a reality. And
Paul, they're not destroying. See, you're looking at it as they're destroying. No, bro. They are creating. They're creating, Paul.
Creating destruction.
What? Right. It's their vision, right? It's what their total surveillance, total security apparatus. The biggest hiring and employment is going to be the government in the next couple of years in the United States. Most of it is going to be on the security side of things. Like I said, we're going into some sort of a techno Colombia back in the 80s. It's gonna be you're gonna have narcos running wild.
Amazon does host the CIA servers.
Yeah. So look at Argentina. Argentina is ruled by warlords. Nobody knows it.
Yeah, and you know why it's allowed to exist? Because it doesn't have a big nuclear arsenal. If you have a big nuclear arsenal, everything changes. You can't trust a failed state with nuclear weapons to that level. The world would go, we cannot allow this to happen. Yeah, because you're risking the very... Okay, yeah, we know the nuclear arsenal's, precarious at best, but that's not the point. The point is, you couldn't have a nation the magnitude of America turned into a complete failed state. Well, intentionally.
It's not going to be a total...
It wouldn't be, you couldn't allow it to happen.
No,
and
I'm
the
not talking
rest
about
of the
Mad
world
Max,
is
Paul.
not going to allow it to happen.
But Paul, I'm not talking about Mad Max, right? So
yeah, but that's what it will become.
No, Paul, they can walk and chew gum. They're creating by destroying, and guess what? They will have complete and total control of the nuclear arsenal. They understand the command control structures will be in place. Why? They are negotiating the complete restructuring of the debt and the bankruptcy of the United States. That's what they're going to be doing. So they're going to have
negotiating with who?
Yeah, they'll be like, hey, Xi, you know what? We try to kill
They're not.
you.
The Chinese are not going to. The Chinese are not going. Why not? Chinese
are very pragmatic, Paul. You and I both know that.
Yeah, but put it this way: if China does negotiate something with the United States, the United States will pay an enormous price for that.
Oh, they will. But they'll have access to the oligarchs. The plutocrats will have access to the Chinese markets. They'll start selling to the Eurasian continent, right? So the plutocrats will make sure that the military-industrial complex.
Okay. So now we're going to create a manufacturing base in the United States to sell goods to the rest of the world. Well, that's not
in New York, in upstate New York, there's a place that's already been cordoned out. It's a factory, already retooled, already sitting idle, and it's a Chinese-owned factory. There's also Chinese-owned factories in New Jersey.
Owns more of the United States than Americans
exactly.
Would,
so the factory position's there, and that's for Americans to go to work in when this whole thing is said and done on the other side of things.
Yeah, but that's an entirely different. Yeah, but that's an entirely different vision than this dystopian world where they're going to have massive population reduction
no,
turn
it will be it will be a
neo-feudalism.
significant reduction when you see in 90 days the catastrophic loss of life. And I'll be honest with you, it's not good or evil. I think it's just going to be happening because that's just the way the systems are in place here. Oh, Matt, you want to say something?
When any empire collapses, unfortunately, that happens.
Well,
but that's not necessarily some intentional design to do that. Because here's the thing, you can't control. The one thing you cannot do, and it doesn't matter whether you think you can control it, you cannot predict the outcome of 300 million Americans or 70 million British people, how they're going to react if you implement certain things intentionally.
Well, that'll be a conversation we should definitely have on another show. Let's go to Q&A. Matt, you want to say something real quick? Then we'll go Q&A. You got like 30 seconds.
I just to get off my system, I guess. I'd recently done a study on Chrystia Freeland, who's also she's a trustee of the World Economic Forum with Carney, and it's a study of some of her writings before she became a member of the government of Canada. And she was still working for Reuters, she was still a Rhodes Scholar working for Reuters and all these things. And it's called Plutocrats versus Technocrats. And it's useful because she's in it 2011, 2012. She's writing these essays and writing these books after getting, she's got the inside track with George Soros, all of these. She's like, yeah, I just happen to know all of these, Ukrainian oligarchs, and they give me, their time, and Russian oligarchs, and they give me their time. And she's got these great exclusive interviews with everybody and Larry Summers and everybody. But she makes the point, and it's a direct threat saying that when we come to a breaking point, this is going to break. There's good plutocrats and bad plutocrats, and she defines over chapters what the good plutocrats are, those who made their wealth and fortunes over the past 35, 40 years of deregulation, and the good ones are the ones who are going to be on things like the Giving Pledge, who are working with the technocrats. And the bad ones are going to be the ones who want to just keep making their money. And they're the ones who are not going to accept the new regulation that we have to bring online. And she's talking about this in 2011 in her book. And the bad ones are the polluters, the ones who refuse to decarbonize. The good ones are going to be the ones who go along with the new ethic. And she names who the good ones are. She gives examples of George Soros, of Buffett, she actually outlines Bezos and others. And so, there's a lot of evidence that gets at this intention, albeit even if this is an insane intention that has no bearing in the fact that Russia and China have rejected the Gorbachev-Zhao Ziyang agenda. Zhao Ziyang was the Gorbachev of China. They wanted to get China already subdued a long time ago, and China had their own fight in the 80s. They luckily woke up and kicked out George Soros, because Zhao Ziyang, the chairman of the CCP, from 87 to 89, he had a think tank with George Soros. He was infusing all of these Western economists and Milton Friedman and everybody into the Chinese elite. And they kicked him out. They put him into house exile till he died, and they kicked out all of the Soros lackeys. So they were smart. They said no to that. And Russia was not so smart at the time, and they went with Yeltsin and Gorbachev and Perestroika, and they got their ass kicked. But luckily, you had in the late 90s some smart people around, Jiang Zemin and Primakov, who didn't want their nations to go down in a hail of fire, and they reorganized something new. And I mean, Chrystia Freeland is very clear, as are many of these writers, people who play a certain role as upper level management. They have a certain ideology and agenda and they're throwing threats directly out at one section of the elite that was useful. They made wealth during this unbounded pirate age of globalization, where survival of the fittest, each against all. And now the time has come where they have to either adapt to the new standards or disappear, like Carney says in his 50 Shades of Grey. Adapt or disappear. So I mean, it's a mess. I'm not trying to say that it's all 100% controlled or anything, but if there is a discoverable principle, and maybe we could have this as another show, because I know we want to get onto Q&A. Yeah. Anyway.
All right. I want to afford Ken real quick. I know that we want to jump into Q&A, but Ken, I think a couple of times you tried to jump in there. Ken, did you have anything real quick? And then that'll be it.
Yeah, a couple of things. You know what? The fact of the matter is I used to be big into looking at a lot of the conspiracy theories, and the reality is, yeah, you've got those like Soros who are working for whatever agents He made his wealth by selling his soul to certain individuals and certain entities. But the fact of the matter is what they've done more than anything has destroyed the culture of Western United States and Europe. If you take a look at it, the relationships, the divisions, everything along those lines have been absolutely broken. And to tell the truth, that's why nothing is really going to, I mean, sure, you might have some individuals like sitting in their ivory towers thinking that they're going to rule the world at their cocktail parties. But the fact of the matter is that we're in a frequency shift, and nature supersedes anything man's going to try to do in the long run. So, you know, yeah, if you take a look at it from three different aspects of conspiracy theories, definition of conspiracy is multiple people doing something in secret for nefarious reasons. It can be 2, it could be 1,000. It doesn't matter. That's the 3 criteria for a conspiracy. Victoria Nuland, George Soros, and the Maidan coup was conspiracy. The pandemic was not a conspiracy, but what they did to try to use it for their own benefit was a conspiracy. Propping Fauci up, all this other shit. Okay. But it didn't really succeed. It didn't really fail. You had certain strong people in certain states that stood up, and those that decided to continue with the lockdowns, their states are done. They're bankrupt. They're toast. Okay. So you do, in short term, create some chaos that brings about destruction. But this overall, unless you're talking supernatural and spiritual and God versus Lucifer type things of taking the whole world, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work. It didn't even do it in Roman times. It didn't do it any other times. Okay. That's what I just want to say about this. Yes, there are conspiracies. Yes, there are certain people who would love to rule the world. But the fact of the matter is it's not been done from day one, unless you count Babel, when everybody spoke the same language and had the same accord. But since then, it's never worked, and they can do anything they want to do. But nature and cycles are going to either, make sure that it doesn't facilitate completely, or it breaks up after a certain amount of years. So that's just my
okay. All right, very good. And gentlemen, obviously very fluid discussion, which, obviously we can have some conversation, later on after this. But I do want to give the people tuning in an opportunity to ask questions. It looks like we did have a couple pop up here. Let me scroll back to them. I probably should have planned in advance and had them emailed in. One of the first questions that came in was from Ronan. Food is a powerful way to control people in large populations, with so much of the farmland being bought up, like with the likes of Bill Gates. Should we expect more price rises and shortages of food? So, anyone want to jump into that one?
Yes. It's pretty interesting. McDonald's is the biggest buyer of the wheat that comes out of Gates's field. So McDonald's also happens to be one of the great feeders of America. And when you go to any part in the country, they're in the lowest of income neighborhoods to everything else in between. So I think food is a great control mechanism, and I think also that coupled with the inflation that's here, prices will skyrocket. There could be some significant supply chain issues that center around food. And that's my thought.
Awesome. Thanks, V. Next question is, both recent China and Russia have been pushing Pakistan to not give USA any bases as they leave Afghanistan. What do you think about Pakistan and its future with Russia and China? Good question.
Well, the CPEC is enormous. I mean, and it's only going to grow in terms of Chinese investment in Pakistan. I mean, Russia's interest in Pakistan are obviously significantly different from China's. China's isn't totally economic. It's also, there's a vested interest in that region to resolve Afghanistan for obvious reasons. So that affects that region, and China has an interest in that, not from a political perspective, but also there are some military and security considerations. The issue of the US wanting to put a base in Pakistan because they are apparently definitely leaving Afghanistan, which is going to raise some interesting questions as to what happens with the opium trade as a result of that, because if the US doesn't get the money from the opium trade, its economy will collapse in the blink of an eye. Of that, there is absolutely no doubt. That's the whole purpose of, well, one of the purposes of 2001 was an excuse to go into Afghanistan so they could seize control of opium trade, because the US economy was on the verge of collapse. And you can look at all the metrics of what subsequently happened in 2002. But yeah, Pakistan's one of those nations that, it's not, you could arguably say it was a vassal state of the US at one point. It certainly isn't now. And there is a degree of resistance of the US putting a base there for obvious reasons, because they don't want the United States launching drone strikes or whatever on Afghanistan, because it's going to end up backfiring on Pakistan itself. And we all know, obviously, the far west of Pakistan, and hence there's tribal lands there with the Taliban, etc. And it's they don't need any more grief than they're already having. So yes, it's very much part of the Belt and Road, and Chinese investment has barely started, even though it's probably $70 billion plus already. But Russia has some sort of trade to some degree with Pakistan, but militarily, there will certainly be coordination with Pakistan in that region. I mean, because obviously we just have to look geographically where it's located. And obviously there are concerns that spill out from Syria and Afghanistan could end up in, I mean, the obvious case is Xinjiang, which is what the West tried to stoke up years ago and start terrorism there so they could hide Xinjiang off. Because, yes, that is true. They have enormous resources there. That's why they wanted the region. But obviously that's failed. So yes, there are some military reasons why it's of interest to both China and Russia, but a lot of it's purely just economic, and just look at its position in relation to the Middle East and alone, and also what might be described as West Asia, I guess, effectively.
Yeah, thank you for that, Paul. Glenn asked the question in regards to whether or not you think that the average person, maybe middle income, low income, whatever, should be actually holding physical gold, silver, knowing what's coming economically, gentlemen.
I think it's especially, and the fact of the matter is after 2008, if, I don't know how much more probably all of us could preach owning gold and silver, because it's wealth protection. It's not a matter of investing. It's not a matter of speculation. It's a matter of wealth protection. And if you knew that Dodd-Frank was going to suddenly change deposits in the bank to liabilities, and they could rehypothecate at any moment, or if you have, did we get cut off?
No.
We're here.
No, you're live.
Okay. If they could rehypothecate at any moment, and if we knew that the central bank was going to start pretty much dominating markets and monetary policy, as a matter of fact, to the point where Chuck Schumer comes out and says that Bernanke, get to work. So all of a sudden the central bank was going to take care of fiscal policy as well. Then you should have the idea that inflation, devaluation, and the like was going to come about with our currency, and the need for something to protect that wealth was absolutely vital. So yeah, for me, I'll give an example. I keep very little money in the bank. Any additional money I have, I put into gold and silver, because that's my savings. If I need to buy something that's beyond what I have in the bank, I sell some and I make the purchase. But I store my savings in gold and silver and just use fiat dollars to pay for my bills and whatever stuff.
Very well said. Thank you, Ken, for that. And gentlemen, I want to make sure to give everyone an opportunity for closing comments. We have a hard stop coming up at 1 p.m. Let's reverse the order. Again, I think it's important to give every contributor an opportunity for their closing comments. We'll reverse the order this time. So we'll start with Ken, and then Paul, Matt, and V. So go for it, Ken.
Yeah, I think over the last year, with the lockdowns, with what certain states have done, what certain other states haven't done, the migration, what's going on now, especially as I truly believe, a rush towards the end of the dollar and its reserve currency status, if not both. The most important thing for people to do is to take a look at, where they're at, their local areas, their families, etc., and realize that the road that has been picked up since we started 2021, even going back to last year, is not going to end well. And all you have to do is take a look at the rioting and destruction, the divisions that have been created amongst the peoples, men and women, blacks and whites, Democrats, it doesn't matter. America and all its core things have been shattered. Every single institution in the United States is corrupt. Everything. There's no reforming it. There's no going back. It's going to get razed to the ground in some capacity before it has the opportunity to be rebuilt. And so that's where we need to keep our eyes open and take a look at what's truly occurring, the pragmatic view, not hope and change, not any other type of crap that you might get from certain members of the alt media or from the media itself. But just realize we are in a transition and there's no point in putting a time frame on it. We're just in the middle of it now.
Thank you for that. I can appreciate it. Paul, go for it.
Yeah, I think basically the only real thing to add to what we've discussed is this is a once in 2,000 year history of a cycle of what is coming. There is no precedent for it. It has never happened in history before. We cannot make an evaluation as to what has happened previously because the entire global financial system is totally different and is unprecedented compared to previous events. The entire way the world interacts and is interoperable, how it trades. Okay, we have fake globalization and we have real globalization, which is the multipolar world. The world operates in an entirely different way than what it did previously. So therefore, we have to make the qualified judgment that what we're seeing and the changes we're going to see are unprecedented. I've said this before, this is more than a change in the financial system and economies. This is a fundamental reboot of humanity. And that, when I say have to be careful, because I said that once and someone went, so you do think we're going to end up as AI, transhuman and humanism, or we're going to, no, I don't mean that. What I mean is this is that fundamental a change. And there are certainly things with regards to Russia and China that people aren't aware of on a level, why the relationship is the way it is between Xi and Putin at this point in time. And also, I'm going to have to make this point, and it is extremely important. I do know the architects of the reset. I know them extremely well. We've had discussions with them for many years. They have been completely accurate in terms of what has happened. And I don't want that to be referred to as a conspiracy theory, because that in essence undermines everything I have done for 6 years, which was I was asked to go out and explain to people the reality of what was unfolding. And I'm sorry I have to say that, but I didn't ever expect to ever have to say that.
Paul, thank you for that. Matthew.
Well, I can definitely back the sentiments that Paul just raised, and Ken as well. The fact that we are living through a massive shift, unlike anything humanity's ever seen before, is something people should really take into themselves and think through and situate their subjective identity into a broader process. There's lessons to be learned. All great crises present opportunities for lessons and insights that normally under times of comfort and apparent stability, we would not normally have access to. So I think that when you look at the principles organizing the concept of value, the idea of future economics, law, self-interest of the multipolar alliance on the other side of the world, there are truths that are being tapped into, which provide the basis of our own survival as well. Since the two futures sort of, I think, pulling on us in different directions are either a renaissance, we could have some of the most beautiful aspects of the best of human society from various cultures become revived, the best of the West, the best of the East. We could see those things coming to the fore as a new form of self-organization and interrelations of international law, as well as just working on big projects together involving all sorts of things that involve a better future for our children, our grandchildren, and those beyond. We know that Russia and China are doing amazing breakthrough things on Arctic development, on space development, jointly building a lunar base. There's work going through helium-3 mining of the moon. All of these things that really are a treat for the imagination and the creative powers of the scientific mind of humankind, right? But then you have this other dark age ethic, this other series of traditions that have no bearing in the future. At least not the future that's worth living in. So I think that seeing this as an opportunity to realign ourselves rather than seeing Russia and China as our enemies, which there's many psyops currently underway all over the place where we all encounter it, to try to focus our idea of China and Russia as the enemies of the Western liberal civilization. That's the medicine. We're we're a basket case on the verge of death, and our pathway to life is through working with Russia, China, and other nations who want to have a future. And so many people are becoming mentally castrated by just seeing them as the cause of Western election frauds, or cyber hacking of the Western way of life, or the releasing of Wuhan labs viruses to destroy Western civilization, all this stuff. So it's absurd. People need to inoculate themselves from this type of false information and think on a higher level. So I would just end it with that.
Very good. V, go for it.
Absolutely. I will say this. Never underestimate the power of bureaucracies to break things, to mess things up, and to never again fix them. Okay. You are in competition against a system that is breaking down. Your job, I've been saying it since the moment I stepped on the scene back in 2012. I've been saying it is to make as much money as possible and to get the hell out of harm's way. That is your only focus. Now, for some of you, it could be making as much money, creating whatever income streams you can, taking advantage of the bubble that this economy is in, and then getting yourself into relocate into a better part of the country. For others, it's going to be completely offshoring, getting the hell out of the country, getting out of the Dodge. But whatever it is, do something, because these guys are on a run to failure mentality, and because they just don't know anything. And I've said it before. I give the best analogy. Where we are at politically and bureaucratically is this: if the oceans of the world were to dry up tomorrow, we are dumb enough to keep building submarines, and we'll create a bucket brigade that will form a bucket line that pours buckets of water on the submarine to keep it wet. That's the type that we are dealing with. Okay, and at one level, and the higher level are those that want to broker what the other side looks like to the what is now the reality, which is the multipolar world, which is here to stay, and what that looks like. But in the end of it is you in the middle, and it's what you do from here on out that's going to be the difference maker. That's it.
Yeah. Yep. Very well said, V. And for all those tuning in today, I want to thank you for listening to our geopolitical roundtable discussion. Also want to thank V, Matthew, Paul, and Ken, and Veles, who had to depart a little bit early. No big deal. He had some work to get accomplished. And don't forget, also do us a favor, jump over to our contributor, our discussion websites, primarily roguenews.com. Bookmark, make sure you subscribe. We attempt to make sure that all of the content is censor free. Also, make sure to check out Matthew Ehret's Substack channel, which is listed again. All these links are in the description of the video. Check out the SiriusReport.com. For Paul's work, as well as his premium content, his podcast, and also Shotgun Economics for Ken Schortgen Jr., and also the Gadfly multi-channel network. So I want to thank everyone for listening in, and great discussion today. And let's do this again real soon. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.